Hi, and welcome to episode 23 of Recent Reads. In this video, I have only 2 physical books to talk about, but a total of 5 books, I think, if I can remember correctly. Now, the trick will be if I can remember all of the arcs that I read that I don't have physical copies of, because I forgot to bring my list back with me. Anyway, we will start with the first book that I completed this week, and that is this gorgeous edition here. It is The Final Strife. Now, if you've watched my May wrap-up video, I did finish this on May 31st, and this is my Goldsboro book for May for that subscription video, and I just barely squeezed it in the month, and I read it as an audiobook. I'll admit, because this book is so absolutely gorgeous, and because some of the things that I had heard in other reviews, glowing reviews, but just some of the other things mentioned that occur in here, I'm like, that's not necessarily my favorite, so I don't know if this book will be for me or not. And because, you know, those two going together, I'm like, I really want to hold on to this book. Thankfully, I will be holding on to it. Now, it ended up at a 4-star, which is still good. It's not an overwhelming favorite. Like, I'm not going to go out and buy the special edition of The Battle Drum, which is book 2. I'm going to hold it this way so we can see the title. But I am going to finish the series, probably get them from the library. And in this, I really found myself fascinated by the world that El-Arifi sets up. But that fascination did not come until about a quarter of the way through the book, when you start to have Sila and Noor's perspectives intertwine. And once that happens, then all of the setup pieces that came before it start to make a little bit more sense. And that is one of the things that brought it down, brought the rating down for me just a little bit, because one of the things that it sets up in here is Sila's addiction. And I forget, it's a type of berry, but I forget what the name of it is at the moment. And she has been dealing with a lot. She was raised, so the setup is blood status is what determines your social class. There's red, blue, and clear. And red is on top, and they can do blood magic. There's another term for it that I can't remember. And then there's the blue, and they are basically, they're the servants. They're the workers. They're mistreated, but they have it better than the clear bloods, who, because of an uprising hundreds of years before, at birth, they are mutilated. They lose their hands and their tongue, so they can't talk. Which, I mean, it's horrific. This definitely does not skimp on the gore, the graphic harshness of it. You get mainly Sila and Noor's perspectives, but there's also Hamza, who is a clear blood. At the outset, this rebellion group steals 12 red-blooded babies and raises them as dusters, as blue bloods, so that they can rise up against the red bloods in this competition to replace all these different wardens of different areas that control these different aspects of the world. They replace the babies that they stole with blue-blooded babies. And there's only one blue-blooded baby who's survived, and that is Noor. And by the time that this book starts, there's only 2 of those stolen children that have made it, because the conspiracy was found out and just about everybody was killed. And Sila blames herself for it, and she also thinks that everybody's dead, but then she encounters another one of those children, now fully grown up. And so that trauma is what leads her into this dependency on this drug, just to get through the day, because she feels like everything is basically useless. And the book spends what I think is a little bit too much time in that section, I think, trying to establish different things, but I think that could have been tightened up just a little bit, and then you would have gotten to the point where Sila and Noor come together a little bit sooner and the plot really gets going. I think that would have bumped it up in my rating. And also, I would have really loved to see more about Hamza, who is someone, basically she is Sila's dealer of these berries, but also you find out there may or may not be a rebellion going on with the, I think they call them ghost bloods, the clear-blooded people. And all these different pieces start to get woven together as more and more gets revealed throughout the book. And it was just well done. There was just those handful of things that dropped it down for me, but I will definitely be continuing in this story. Next, I'm going to talk about a book that I read that I actually finished before I finished Final Strife, but forgot. And that is, I'm going to talk about it just briefly, and that is Winnie Zhang Vanquishes a King. That was another arc that I had, and I read the first book in the series physically because I didn't realize when I requested the arc that it was actually the second in a series. I talked about the first book in last week's recent reads, and that did some really solid stuff in a genre that is getting kind of full now, but I still appreciate learning about these different mythologies, especially, you know, at the middle grade level, which is where the Percy Jackson-esque stories are happening. The sequel, the second book in the series, is missing that aspect of sort of uniqueness that the first book had, and so it fell into very stereotypical tropes for this, I'm going to call it a subgenre. And because it didn't really do anything new, I didn't rate it very high, but I did rate it 3.5 stars because it was an enjoyable read. Next, we have the first book that I read in June. So in June, even though I'm going out of town for half the month, I've decided to participate in 2 readathons. But thankfully, these are readathons where I don't have to pick out the stuff ahead of time. I mean, I could, but I don't have to. And one of those is the Tarot readathon put on by Noelle 7 Pages and I think Deja's Book World. I really like this one because you can go book by book and just draw a random tarot card, and all of them have prompts, and I still need to update log all of my points on that. But the first one I pulled was, I forget which card, but the prompt was to read poetry. And I didn't really have anything, I thought, on my list. But then when I looked at Libro, one of my ALCs was the second Miles Morales book written by Jason Reynolds. I love Jason Reynolds. And in this book, it actually alternates between poetry and prose. And I've read the first of the books that he has written, which is phenomenal. Then in this one, it takes place right after that first book. And Miles and several other people are in ISS because of the events that happened in the first book. Of course, it's a superhero book, so things are going to happen. And even though it involved some bugs, some termites, and some other interesting descriptions that I was kind of like a little bit creeped out about, I still really enjoyed this. It is just so well done. And there were 2 different narrators. One did the poetry portion, which were poems that Miles was writing. And one did the, I forget what I call it. It's like the voiceover that you hear sometimes in superhero movies, books, etc. And so the poetry was what Miles wrote, and the prose was this voiceover part. And I love that it had 2 different narrators for it, and it's still continually telling the story, just alternating between it. So much fun. I really enjoyed that one. And that was an advanced listening copy that I had via Libro. So that did not help me on either of my goals, but it was a quick read and a very enjoyable read. At this point, we're getting towards the end of the week. And on Friday, I didn't actually read a lot because once all that finished, school year wrapped up, we had an evening flight up to Chicago for the weekend. And because I was traveling, obviously I'm not going to bring a bunch of books with me, so I brought obviously my phone and my Kindle. And I actually read and got through 3.5 more books, which is not too shabby. So let me talk about the 3 that I got through. The first of those that I finished was a book called A Bit of Earth. And I did not realize until about 60% of the way through the book when I looked at a synopsis, that this was a retelling of The Secret Garden. I loved The Secret Garden growing up. I loved the movie. I loved the book. Obviously, there are some problematic things in the original book. There's some covert racism and ableism, but there are aspects of that story that are just so well done. And what Riazi did in this book is she centered a girl of color, a Desi Bangladeshi, I think Bangladeshi? I can't remember at the moment because I've read a lot, all crumbled together. But she's a very prickly little girl. That's how she describes herself, middle school age. I loved the opening scene. It captured me. And she has been, since her parents died, she's been passed around from person to person to person because no one really actually wants to take care of her, but someone has to because she's a child. And she's at an airport in New York, I believe, and she's listening to this conversation of the people trying to find her who are supposed to be responsible for her, but she's over in the luggage area of unclaimed luggage, and she's made sort of a little fort, and she's just sitting there and she's enjoying herself and she's cozy and she's like, I don't care that they're looking for me. It's kind of fun just to stay over here. And she's very standoffish. She describes herself as prickly, is kind of the best word for it. And that stays a defining part of her personality as it goes through the book. And I really love the fact that Riazi shows her learning and growing throughout the book, but not losing that part of her personality, which a lot of people would be like, being prickly is a character flaw. It wasn't. It's not. She has to learn how to deal with the fact that her parents were never really close to her. They traveled all over. Now they're gone. Okay, she wasn't really all that close to them, but where does she fit? And Riazi just did a really good job in this book. Unfortunately, the next book that I finished was Wild Blood by Lauren Blackwood. And I remembered Bethany with Beautifully Bookish Bethany talking about this, and it was a book that she had to DNF. I kind of understand why, because I almost DNF'd it. If I hadn't already DNF'd another arc in the City of Time, I probably would have, but this one read extremely quickly. The world could have been fascinating. It was set in an alternate history version of Jamaica, but make it magical. And there were these people who had like blood science, which meant that they could basically control blood and turn it into things, like pull it out of people, turn it into weapons, etc. She has this connection to the forest, but also these people are basically employed by this company that takes, rich white people on tours through the forest, the very dangerous forest, but then exploits these people, usually of either lighter skin or African American, etc., to protect them. There are a lot of things that, number one, were never explained. So many things were like just thrown in here and all wibbly wobbly and not making a lot of sense. She falls instantly for this guy who's not a white guy, but he's, very light skinned. He's very rich. She's one of these customers who's come in, and he is Christian, or at least that's what he's saying. He sings a lot of these hymns, etc. He always calls her beloved. Wow, that got so annoying when they're calling each other beloved. I was like, stop. That's so annoying. And the romance between them did not make sense at all. And of course, he's perfect. And there's people warning her about him. And there's other people that she works with that she loves. And there's also someone who used to be her friend, but then something happened and he became the chosen one to inherit the company because he could pass as white. And just so much was happening. And like the villains they were taken care of like that. So anticlimactically. And then the event that makes her hate this other character, at one point about 40% or so through the book, she just spits this accusation out at him that he didn't do something to protect her from the boss, the owner of the company. And I stopped and I'm like, wait, did I miss where this was talked about before? Because it said it happened before the narrative started, but it had never been referenced before that, and yet somehow we're supposed to know that that's why she hates him. That event was not explained for another 20% of the book. But it kept throughout that 20%, it kept being brought up as the thing that she had against him. The atmosphere is great. Lauren Blackwood did great with the atmosphere. That's the only thing she did great with. Not a good book. Probably one of the worst books I've read all year, unfortunately. And the disappointments, unfortunately, continued, but with a much better written book. And that's the other physical copy that I have, and that is Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee. This is a tiny book. Not only is it short, like it's extremely short height-wise, but also only about 150 pages. And so the audiobook was only 4 hours, and I listened to it on 2.5 times speed. It did not take me long to get through. I honestly struggle to see the point of it, because this is not an already established world. This is a brand new world, so you've got to do world building in here. This book, it starts when she's a child, and it talks about how she was an only child for so long, then she had a brother, and then something terrible happens to the brother and her mom when the brother's about 13, so massive amount of years. And then she wants to avenge her mother and brother, and so goes into training to fight with these rooks, which are the only things that can kill manticores, which are what killed her family. And there's like training montages-ish, and like she makes her first kill. She mentions the manticore that killed her family, but it's not this overwhelming drive to find that one specific manticore and make sure it pays. So that sort of an arc would have made sense. And then just things just keep happening. It's like it's just this story of events that are happening and taking place and moving along, and then we're done. 152 pages was fine, but I really struggled to see the point of this. If you have something spanning that many years, a completely new world, nothing was explored in depth. Not the world, not the driving motivation for her to join up in this very dangerous profession to kill manticores. None of the relationships. And I just feel like, did I do Fonda Lee a disservice by starting with this one and not the Greenbone Saga? We shall see, because it's still on my list to start. But unfortunately, this was a rather disappointing way to end my week. So there you have it. There are the 6 books that I read this week. Only 2 physically, the rest were Kindle. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.